She walked into our anniversary dinner, 7 months pregnant, and announced it was my husband's baby. What she didn't realize was that by dessert, both their lives would be completely destroyed. "Surprise, honey," Olivia chirped, her hand resting on her swollen belly as she stood next to my shell-shocked husband at Le Papillon. Those words shattered the carefully orchestrated evening I'd spent months planning. 15 years of marriage reduced to a cruel spectacle in Boston's most prestigious French restaurant. I watched them from my seat, my hand steady as I lifted my champagne glass, my expression revealing nothing of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "I thought you should hear it from me directly," Olivia continued, her designer maternity dress, highlighting her obvious pregnancy. She pulled out the chair next to Marcus, my husband, who sat frozen, his face a mixture of shock and something else. Fear. He knew me too well to think this would end quietly. The candlelight caught the sapphire pendant around her neck, my mother's necklace, which had mysteriously disappeared during our summer house renovation. How fitting that she'd chosen tonight. To wear it? Another little twist of the knife. But what neither of them knew was that I'd been waiting for this moment, orchestrating every detail of what would follow. Marcus finally found his voice. "Rebecca, I can explain," he started, but I raised my hand, silencing him with a gesture. The restaurant's soft lighting caught my wedding ring, a bitter reminder of vows soon to be shattered. "Please, sit down, Olivia," I said, my voice carrying that same warmth I'd used countless times with frightened patients in my oncology ward. "Since you've made this evening so memorable, you might as well join us." The irony of my invitation was lost on them both. Olivia settled into her chair, a triumphant smile playing at her lips. At 28, she was 13 years my junior, a fact Marcus had obviously found enticing when he hired her as his new hospital administrator last year. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that had been months in the making. I glanced around Le Papillon's elegant dining room, noting the strategic placement of security cameras I'd meticulously mapped out weeks ago. Every angle would capture what was about to unfold. The maitre d' caught my eye and gave an imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. "How far along are you?" I asked, taking another sip of champagne. The vintage Dom Perignon, Marcus's favorite, had been my choice for this evening. He always did have expensive taste, in everything from women to wine. 7 months, Olivia replied, her hand protectively cradling her belly. "Due in January." She reached for Marcus's hand on the table, a gesture meant to wound. He withdrew, it quickly, his eyes darting between us. I allowed myself a small smile. 7 months, exactly as my private investigator had reported. The timing couldn't have been more perfect if I'd planned it myself. And in a way, I had. "Fascinating," I murmured, reaching for my purse. "Then you must have conceived right around the time of the hospital's annual fundraising gala, the night Marcus gave that moving speech about medical ethics and family values." The color drained slightly from Olivia's face. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his expertise in reading patient symptoms now turned against him as he tried to decipher my too calm demeanor. "Rebecca," he began again, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he used with junior residents. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out. I was going to tell you—" "When?" I interrupted softly. "After the baby was born? Or perhaps after you'd finished transferring hospital funds into your private accounts?" The wine glass in his hand froze halfway to his lips. Olivia's triumphant smile faltered for the first time that evening. Neither of them had expected this level of knowledge, this calm recitation of facts that shouldn't have been in my possession. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. 15 years of marriage had taught me every tell, every micro-expression that signaled his lies. I reached into my purse and withdrew an envelope, placing it carefully on the crisp white tablecloth. I think you do, just like you know about the falsified patient records, the insurance fraud, and the mysterious deaths in the experimental treatment wing. Olivia's face had lost its rosy glow. Marcus, what is she talking about? I turned to her, genuine pity mixing with satisfaction. Oh, Olivia. Did you really think you were special? That you were the first? Perhaps you should ask him about Dr. Sarah Martinez from 3 years ago. Or Nurse Jessica Thompson before that, though neither of them was foolish enough to get pregnant. The maitre d' approached our table with practiced grace, carrying another envelope. As requested, madame, he said, presenting it to me with a slight bow. Right on schedule. What's going on? Marcus demanded, his composure cracking. He hadn't noticed that I'd been orchestrating this evening from the start, that his dramatic revelation had played right into my hands. I picked up my champagne glass one final time, studying how the bubbles caught the light. This was just the beginning, the first domino in an elaborate sequence that would unravel everything Marcus had built. By morning, his perfect world, his reputation, his career, his freedom, would be in shambles. Well, I said, setting down my glass with deliberate care, since we're all sharing surprises tonight, I have a few of my own. I opened the first envelope with deliberate slowness, aware of Marcus's increasingly anxious stare. The memories of our shared past flashed through my mind as I withdrew the contents. Medical records, death certificates, and a USB drive that made Olivia's perfectly glossed lips part in surprise. What is this? Marcus demanded, his confident demeanor cracking further. His hand reached for the documents, but I held them just out of reach. History, I replied simply, laying out the first document. This is the death certificate of Janet Morrison, age 42, who died in your experimental treatment wing 3 months ago. Her insurance policy paid out $2 million. I placed another document beside it. And here's Thomas Chen, age 38. Another tragic loss in your care. Another multi-million-dollar policy. Those were legitimate deaths, Marcus protested, but his voice had lost its usual authority. Terminal patients who didn't respond to treatment. Except they weren't terminal, were they? I spread out more documents across the pristine tablecloth. These are their original medical charts, before you altered them, before you convinced them to join your experimental program, before you convinced them to change their insurance beneficiaries. Olivia's hand had dropped from her belly, her triumphant expression replaced by growing horror. Marcus, what did you do? I turned to her, my voice gentle. Did you ever wonder how he could afford that penthouse where he took you? Those weekend trips to the Hamptons? The designer wardrobe he bought you? I paused, letting the implications sink in. Blood money, Olivia. All of it. The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade as I continued my revelation. The other diners, the soft classical music, the gentle clink of silverware, all became background to our unfolding drama. You see, I continued, while you were playing house with my husband, I was tracking something far more sinister than just infidelity. Did you know that the mortality rate in Marcus's experimental wing is 3 times higher than the national average? That every single patient who died had recently updated their insurance policies? Marcus's face had turned ashen. You're making wild accusations without any proof. Proof? I smiled, sliding the USB drive across the table. Like the video footage from the hospital security cameras showing you falsifying medical records? Or perhaps the recorded conversations with insurance adjusters. I've been gathering evidence for months, darling. Ever since I noticed the pattern of deaths in your department. I reached for the second envelope the maitre d' had delivered. But that's not even the most interesting part. Would you like to know what else I discovered, Olivia? About your own medical history? Her hand instinctively went back to her pregnant belly, protective and fearful. What are you talking about? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Your previous position at Memorial Hospital in Chicago, I said, watching her face carefully. The one that ended rather abruptly after certain prescription irregularities were discovered. The position that mysteriously vanished from your resume before Marcus hired you. The color drained from her face completely. How did you— I'm an oncologist, dear. I have contacts at every major hospital in the country. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate the woman my husband hired right after 3 other qualified candidates mysteriously withdrew their applications? Marcus was starting to understand now. The carefully constructed facade he'd built was crumbling, and with it, his composure. Rebecca, whatever you think you found— Found? I interrupted softly. Like the offshore accounts where you've been transferring the insurance payments. Or perhaps you mean the evidence that you've been prescribing unnecessary treatments to inflate insurance claims? Tell me, how many patients have you killed for profit? Olivia pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I don't know anything about this. I never knew— Sit down, I said, my voice carrying an edge for the first time that evening. We're not finished yet. After all, you're carrying my husband's child. Don't you want to know what kind of man the father of your baby really is? The maitre d' appeared, again this time with a tablet. On the screen, security footage played silently. Marcus in his office, altering medical records late at night. Another clip showed him meeting with insurance adjusters, then making deposits at various banks. It's amazing what people will share when they discover they've been part of a medical fraud scheme, I mused. Nurses, administrators, even the hospital's IT staff. Once they realized what was happening, they were quite eager to help me document everything. Marcus's hand was shaking as he reached for his water glass. These are all lies. I've saved lives. I'm one of the most respected oncologists in the country. Were, I corrected gently. You were respected. By tomorrow morning, every major hospital board in the country will have copies of this evidence. The medical board, the insurance companies, the FBI, they'll all know what you've done. The gravity of the situation was finally hitting him. I could see it in his eyes, the same look I'd seen in patients when they received a terminal diagnosis. The understanding that everything was about to change, and not in their favor. As for you, Olivia, I continued, turning back to her, I suggest you consider your next moves very carefully. Accessory to medical fraud carries significant prison time, especially when it involves patient deaths. Though I suspect the authorities might be lenient if you cooperate fully. She was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. The triumphant homewrecker of an hour ago was gone, replaced by a terrified young woman who had just discovered she was carrying the child of a murderer. I had no idea, she whispered. I swear I didn't know about any of this. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. You were just another pawn in his game, like the nurses before you, the patients he killed, the families he destroyed. Marcus has always been very good at using people. The sound of footsteps approaching. Our table made Marcus look up sharply. 2 men in suits were making their way through the restaurant, their badges visible at their belts. Right on schedule, I murmured, checking my watch. The FBI has been very interested in the evidence I've gathered. They've just been waiting for the right moment to make their move. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair toppling backward with a crash that drew every eye in the restaurant. You can't do this to me, he hissed, his composed doctor's demeanor completely shattered. I built that department from nothing. Everything I did was to advance medical science. Advanced medical science? I repeated softly, rising to face him. Like Jennifer Adams, age 35, mother of 3? You convinced her she had stage 4 lymphoma when she was actually in remission. She died in your experimental wing 2 weeks after updating her life insurance policy. Was that advancing medical science, Marcus? The FBI agents were only steps away now. I could see the moment Marcus contemplated running, the slight shift in his stance, the darting of his eyes toward the kitchen exit. But Olivia's presence, her pregnant form a stark reminder of his responsibilities, kept him rooted in place. "Dr. Marcus Thorne," one of the agents announced, his voice carrying in the now silent restaurant. "We need you to come with us. We have some questions about several patient deaths at Boston Metropolitan Hospital." I watched as they read him his rights, the same hands that had performed countless surgeries now being cuffed behind his back. Olivia sat frozen in her chair, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned white. "Mrs. Thorne," the second agent turned to me, "we'll need your statement as well. Your cooperation has been invaluable in this investigation." Marcus's head snapped up at that. "Investigation? How long have you been working with them?" The betrayal in his voice was almost comical, considering the circumstances. "Since Janet Morrison's death," I replied calmly. "Remember when I mentioned having lunch with her daughter last month? Claire was quite interested to learn that her mother's cancer had been in remission before entering your care. She was even more interested in the life insurance policy you convinced her mother to take out." The memories of that lunch flooded back, Claire's tears turning to rage as I showed her the evidence, her mother's original medical charts proving the cancer had been responding to traditional treatment before Marcus intervened. It had been the turning point in my investigation, the moment I knew I couldn't just walk away with a divorce settlement. "Agent Cooper," I said, addressing the lead FBI agent, "you'll find additional documentation in the hospital's backup servers. The access codes are in the files I provided. Pay particular attention to the records from the last 3 years. That's when the pattern of suspicious deaths began." Olivia suddenly lurched to her feet, her face pale. "I think I'm going to be sick," she mumbled, rushing toward the restroom. One of the female agents who had just arrived followed her, while curious diners pretended not to stare at our unfolding drama. "I did it for us," Marcus said suddenly, his voice breaking. "The department needed funding. The experimental treatments could have saved lives. We just needed more time, more resources." "Save it for your lawyer," Agent Cooper replied, but I raised my hand to interrupt. "No, let him speak," I said softly. "I want to hear him explain how killing patients for insurance money was helping anyone but himself. Tell me, Marcus, what noble purpose did the penthouse serve? The designer watches? The luxury cars?" I opened my phone and pulled up a series of photographs. Marcus at expensive restaurants with Olivia, shopping at high-end boutiques, viewing penthouses in Beacon Hill. "Your department's mortality rate jumped 312% after you started the experimental program, while your personal wealth increased by millions. Quite a coincidence, isn't it?" As they led Marcus away, I turned to the remaining agent. "You'll want to speak with Dr. Patterson in pathology. He's been falsifying death certificates to match Marcus's diagnosis. And check the pharmacy records. There's a pattern of medication errors that's too consistent to be accidental." The maitre d' approached again, this time with a concerned expression. "Madame, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in our private dining room, away from—" He gestured discreetly at the other diners, many of whom were now openly staring. "No need," I replied, gathering my things. "I believe our dinner is concluded." I picked up my mother's sapphire necklace, which Olivia had left behind in her rush, to the restroom. The stones felt cool against my palm, a tangible reminder of everything that had been stolen, and everything I had reclaimed. As I walked toward the exit, I heard the whispers beginning. By morning, Boston's medical community would be rocked by the scandal. Marcus's reputation, built over decades, would be destroyed. The experimental treatment wing, his crown jewel, would be shut down and investigated. Every patient death, every insurance claim, every medical decision would be scrutinized. Outside in the cool autumn air, I paused to look back at Le Papillon. Through the window, I could see the FBI agents comforting a sobbing Olivia, who had emerged from the restroom looking shattered. Part of me felt sorry for her. She was young, pregnant, and had been manipulated by a master deceiver. But she had made her choices, just as Marcus had made his. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire Morrison. "Is it done?" "Yes," I replied simply. "Justice for your mother and all the others." Another text came through, this one from my contact at the medical board. "Emergency meeting called for 7 a.m. Licenses will be suspended pending investigation." Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The carefully gathered evidence, the meticulous documentation, the strategic timing, it had all come together perfectly. Marcus had thought tonight would be his moment of triumph, his chance to humiliate me with his pregnant mistress. Instead, it had become his undoing. I slipped into the back of my waiting car, nodding to Michael, my private investigator, who sat in the driver's seat. "Well done," he said simply. "The FBI has everything they need." "Everything and more," I confirmed. 3 years of evidence, dozens of witness statements, complete financial records. He'll never practice medicine again. Neither will anyone who helped him. As we pulled away from the restaurant, I thought about the months of preparation that had led to this moment. The late nights reviewing medical records, the meetings with grieving families, the careful documentation of every suspicious death. I had built an airtight case while maintaining my role as the unsuspecting wife. "What about the girl?" Michael asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "The pregnancy complicates things." "She's not the first woman he's deceived," I replied, thinking of the others I'd discovered during my investigation. "But she'll be the last. I've arranged for her to receive immunity in exchange for her testimony. She'll need it, especially now." The city lights blurred past as we drove through Boston's streets. Tomorrow, the story would break in every major newspaper. Prominent oncologist arrested for patient deaths. Medical fraud scheme uncovered at Boston Metropolitan. Doctor killed patients for insurance money. But tonight, I had one more stop to make. "Take me to the hospital," I instructed Michael. "There are some patients' families who deserve to hear this in person before it hits the news." As we drove, I thought about how different this anniversary had turned out from what Marcus had planned. He had expected to destroy me with his revelation. Instead, I had dismantled his entire world. Every death he had orchestrated, every life he had cut short for profit, would now be avenged. The hospital's imposing silhouette loomed ahead, its windows gleaming in the night. This building, once a symbol of healing, had become the center of Marcus's web of deception. As we pulled into the parking lot, I noticed several FBI vehicles already on site. They were moving fast, securing records and interviewing staff before anything could be destroyed. "Dr. Patterson's still in his office," Michael informed me, checking his phone. "Our sources say he's been there since getting word of Marcus's arrest, probably trying to cover his tracks." I smiled grimly. "Too late for that. Everything's already been documented, backed up, and submitted to the authorities." I thought of the hidden cameras I'd had installed in the pathology lab 3 months ago, capturing every falsified death certificate, every manipulated test result. The hospital's night shift staff watched curiously as I walked through the familiar corridors, Michael 2 steps behind me. News traveled fast in hospitals. By now, everyone probably knew about Marcus's arrest at Le Papillon. What they didn't know yet was how deep the corruption went, how many of their colleagues were implicated. I found Janet Morrison's daughter, Claire, waiting in the hospital chapel. She wasn't alone. Other families had gathered there after receiving my message. Thomas Chen's widow, Sarah. Jennifer Adams's teenage children. All victims of Marcus's greed, all waiting to hear that justice was finally being served. "It's done," I announced quietly, standing before them. "Marcus was arrested tonight. The FBI is gathering evidence as we speak. Every death, every falsified record, every stolen dollar. It's all coming to light." Claire stood, tears streaming down her face. "Mom knew something was wrong. she said softly. She told me the treatments felt different, more aggressive, but Dr. Thorne was so respected, so convincing. We trusted him. They all did, Sarah Chen added, her voice bitter. Thomas was getting better before Dr. Thorne convinced him to join the experimental program. 3 weeks later, he was gone. I pulled out my phone, showing them the evidence I'd gathered. The FBI has everything. Proof that your loved ones were responding to traditional treatments before Marcus intervened. Records of the insurance policies he pressured them to take out. Documentation of how he systematically killed them while profiting from their deaths. Jennifer Adams's son, barely 17, looked up from his hands. What about the others? The patients still in his care? The FBI and medical board are reviewing every case, I assured him. Any patient under Marcus's care will be immediately transferred to other oncologists. A full audit of all his cases over the past 5 years is already underway. My phone buzzed, a message from Agent Cooper. Dr. Patterson just tried to leave the country. We intercepted him at Logan International. He's agreed to cooperate fully. I shared this news with the families, watching as relief and vindication washed over their faces. Patterson's cooperation would be crucial. As the pathologist who falsified death certificates, he could corroborate every detail of Marcus's scheme. There's something else you should know, I continued, taking a seat among them. Marcus's Mistress is pregnant with his child. She showed up at our anniversary dinner tonight to announce it. That's when we executed the arrest. Sarah Chen laughed bitterly. Living the high life on blood money, starting a new family while we buried ours. Did she know? About what he was doing? No, I replied honestly. She was just another victim of his manipulation. The FBI is offering her immunity in exchange for her testimony about the financial aspects she witnessed. She'll help strengthen the case against him. The chapel door opened, and Agent Cooper entered quietly. Mrs. Thorne, we found something in Dr. Patterson's office you need to see. I excused myself and followed him to the pathology department. The lab was crawling with FBI agents, documenting everything. On Patterson's computer screen, emails between him and Marcus detailed their scheme. How they selected patients, how they falsified results, how they split the insurance payments. There are more victims than we initially thought, Cooper said grimly. Going back at least 5 years, the death toll could be in the dozens. I felt my hands shake for the first time that night. Even after months of investigation, the scale of Marcus's crimes could still shock me. Each death represented a family destroyed, a life cut short, all to fund his lavish lifestyle and God complex. My phone buzzed again, Olivia's lawyer this time. My client is prepared to make a full statement. She has documentation of financial transactions, meetings, everything she witnessed. In exchange for immunity and witness protection. Tell her we accept, I replied. But she needs to understand. Every detail matters. Every conversation, every document, every suspicious interaction she observed. This isn't just about the money anymore. As I walked through the oncology ward, I passed the rooms where so many had died under Marcus's care. The experimental wing, his pride and joy, was now sealed with crime scene tape. Nurses who had once admired him now turned away, some crying, others angry at their unwitting role in his crimes. Back in the chapel, I shared the latest developments with the families. This is bigger than we thought, I admitted, but that means more justice, more answers, more closure for everyone affected. What happens now? Claire asked, clutching her mother's photograph. Now, I said, we make sure this never happens again. The hospital board meets tomorrow morning. Every doctor who participated in or knew about these crimes will lose their license. The FBI is tracking down every penny of insurance money. And Marcus, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison, thinking about every life he destroyed. As if on cue, my phone lit up with news alerts. The story was breaking. Prominent Boston oncologist arrested for patient deaths. Medical horror, doctor killed for insurance money. Pregnant mistress reveals all in hospital murder scheme. The families huddled together, reading the headlines. Their private grief was becoming public vindication. Their suspicions, dismissed for so long, were finally proven right. And Marcus's carefully constructed reputation was crumbling in real time. Dawn was breaking over Boston when I finally left the hospital. The night shift was ending, passing their duties to fresh-faced morning staff who arrived to find their workplace transformed into a crime scene. News vans had already gathered outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the brightening sky like mechanical flowers. "Dr. Rebecca Thorne," reporters called out as I emerged. "Did you know about your husband's crimes? What about his pregnant mistress? How long has this been going on?" I paused at the top of the steps, considering my response. The story I told now would set the tone for everything that followed. "This is not about a husband's infidelity," I said clearly into the forest of microphones. "This is about dozens of families who trusted their loved ones to our care, only to have that trust betrayed in the most horrific way possible. Every question should be about them, not about my marriage." My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the story broke. Hospital board members, other oncologists, former patients' families, all wanting to know if their cases were affected, if their loved ones had been victims. Each message was another crack in the foundation of Marcus's legacy. The hospital's legal team is assembling in the conference room, Michael informed me as we got back into the car. "They're talking about damage control." I smiled grimly. "Too late for that. I've already sent copies of everything to every major medical board in the country. By noon, there won't be a hospital administrator in America who doesn't know exactly what happened here." The morning sun cast long shadows across the city as we drove to my next appointment. I'd scheduled a meeting with the hospital's ethics committee, not the ceremonial one that Marcus had chaired, but the real investigators who'd been quietly watching him for months at my request. Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, the committee's head, was waiting in her office. Her face showed the strain of a sleepless night. "The numbers are worse than we thought," she said without preamble. "We've identified 47 suspicious deaths over the past 5 years, all patients who were responding to traditional treatments before entering Marcus's care, all with recently updated insurance policies." I sat heavily in the chair across from her desk. 47 families, 47 lives cut short. The scale of Marcus's crimes was still expanding, like ripples in a poisoned pond. "There's more," Eleanor continued, sliding a folder across her desk. "We found evidence that he was planning to expand the program. He'd already identified 20 more patients for his experimental treatments. If you hadn't stopped him—" "Show me," I said, opening the folder. Inside were medical charts, insurance documents, all the groundwork for more murders disguised as medical treatment. My hands trembled as I recognized names, current patients, people I passed in the hospital, corridors, faces I knew. "Rebecca," Eleanor said softly, "there's something else you need to see." She turned her computer monitor toward me. On the screen was a life insurance policy, my own, taken out 6 months ago without my knowledge. Marcus's signature was on all the documents. "He was planning to kill me too," I said, surprisingly calm. "After the baby was born, I suppose. A tragic medical accident, just like the others." "The policy was for $5 million, Eleanor confirmed, set to pay out to a trust he controlled. We found emails discussing the details with Dr. Patterson. They were going to make it look like a postpartum complication." The pieces clicked into place. Marcus's insistence that I switch to his recommended obstetrician, his sudden interest in my medical care, the way he'd been documenting everything about my routine. He'd been setting the stage for my death while playing the concerned husband. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Cooper. "You need to see this. Interrogation Room 3. 20 minutes later, I stood in the FBI field office, watching through one-way glass as Olivia broke down during questioning. Her perfectly crafted facade had crumbled completely. replaced by genuine horror as she learned the full scope of Marcus's crimes. "He said the money was from private research grants," she sobbed. "He told me the experimental treatments were saving lives. I never knew. Oh God, all those people." "She's telling the truth," Cooper said, standing beside me. "Her only real crime was falling for his lies, like the others before her." "The others," I repeated. "How many were there?" "We've identified 3 previous relationships, all following the same pattern. Young, ambitious medical professionals. Each one distanced themselves after noticing something wrong with his practices. Your predecessor, Dr. Sarah Martinez, actually filed an ethics complaint before she suddenly resigned and moved across the country. I made a mental note to contact Sarah. Her testimony could help establish the pattern of Marcus's behavior, show that his crimes weren't a recent development, but a long-term scheme. My phone lit up with another news alert. Hospital board announces emergency session. Below was a photo of Marcus being led into the federal courthouse, still wearing his dinner clothes from Le Papillon. The man who'd left our house that morning planning to humiliate me with his pregnant mistress was now facing multiple murder charges. "Mrs. Thorne?" A young FBI agent approached with a fresh stack of documents. "We found these in Dr. Patterson's home safe. They appear to be records of payments, dates going back 6 years. I began sorting through the papers, each page adding to the mountain of evidence: bank transfers, offshore accounts, coded references to patient names. Patterson had documented everything. His meticulous record-keeping would be Marcus's final undoing. "The DA is pushing for multiple life sentences," Cooper informed me. "No chance of parole. Given the number of victims and the premeditated nature of the crimes, it's practically guaranteed." I thought of the families in the hospital chapel, of Claire Morrison clutching her mother's photograph, of Jennifer Adams' teenage children trying to understand why their mother had died. They would all get their day in court, their chance to face Marcus and tell him exactly what he'd stolen from them. "What about the hospital?" I asked. "The administrators who looked the other way? The nurses who suspected something but stayed quiet? We're building cases against everyone involved," Cooper assured me. "Dr. Patterson's cooperation is key. He's naming names, providing dates, confirming every detail of the scheme. No one who participated or covered up these crimes will escape. Justice." Outside, the morning traffic was building as Boston came to life. Somewhere in the city, Marcus sat in a holding cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this. He'd always been convinced of his own brilliance, his ability to manipulate any situation to his advantage. That same arrogance had made him sloppy, leaving a trail of evidence that had led to this moment. "Dr. Thorne," a young intern rushed up to me as I entered the hospital for the emergency board meeting. "You need to see this. We found something," in Dr. Thorne's private office. I followed her through the familiar corridors, now bustling with FBI agents and hospital security. Marcus's office, once a shrine to his achievements with its wall of awards and accolades, was being systematically dismantled. Every certificate was being checked for authenticity, every achievement verified. Behind a false panel in his desk, they'd found a laptop. Not his regular work computer, but a separate machine used solely for tracking his criminal enterprise. As the FBI's tech team worked to decrypt it, fragments of information were already emerging: patient lists, payment schedules, death projections calculated with horrifying precision. "He had it all planned out," Agent Cooper explained, showing me the spreadsheets. Each patient's estimated death date, insurance payout amounts, even contingency plans if someone started asking questions. It was like a business plan for murder. My eyes caught on a familiar name in the spreadsheets: mine. There it was in cold clinical detail. My projected death date, 3 months after what would have been my due date with the baby that never existed. Marcus had planned every detail, down to the specific complications that would lead to my unfortunate passing. "Rebecca?" a voice called from the doorway. I turned to see Dr. Sarah Martinez, Marcus's former colleague and lover, standing there. She'd flown in from Seattle as soon as she'd heard the news. I should have pushed harder when I first noticed something wrong. Maybe if I had... You tried, I reminded her gently. You filed reports, made complaints. But Marcus was too powerful, then too respected. No one wanted to believe it. Sarah moved into the office, her eyes taking in the chaos of the investigation. When he started pushing experimental treatments on patients who were responding well to standard protocols, I knew something was wrong. But he was so convincing, had an answer for every question. By the time I realized the full scope of what he was doing, I was already compromised. He threatened you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not directly. He was too smart for that. But he made it clear that if I pursued my concerns, my career would be over. No hospital would touch me after he was done. So I ran. She paused, looking at the laptop screen. Those patients, I knew some of them, watched them die while he collected his blood money. My phone buzzed, a message from Olivia's lawyer. She was being moved to a safe house, her testimony deemed crucial enough to warrant protection. The pregnancy had been confirmed. She was indeed carrying Marcus's child. Another innocent life entangled in his web of deceit. The hospital board. Meeting was set for 9 a.m. As I walked into the conference room, I could feel the weight of what was about to happen. Every board member had received my complete dossier on Marcus's crimes. They'd had all night to process the evidence, to understand how their prestigious hospital had become a killing ground. Dr. Rebecca Thorne, the board chairman began, his voice heavy. We owe you an apology. When you first brought concerns about the experimental wings mortality rates to our attention 6 months ago, we dismissed them. We trusted Marcus's reputation over solid evidence. It's not about apologies, I replied, taking my seat. It's about making sure this never happens again. Every system that allowed Marcus to operate unchecked needs to be examined and overhauled. The meeting lasted hours. Every death was reviewed, every procedure questioned. The board voted unanimously to suspend all experimental treatments pending full investigation. A task force would be created to review every case Marcus had handled in the past decade. During a brief break, I stepped out to take a call from Agent Cooper. We've decoded more of the laptop's contents, he reported. Found evidence of similar schemes at other hospitals before he came to Boston. We're looking at potentially dozens more victims. The scale of Marcus's crimes kept expanding, like a cancer spreading through the medical community. Each new revelation brought more families forward, more suspicious deaths to investigate, more lives destroyed by his greed. There's something else, Cooper continued. We found correspondence between Marcus and several pharmaceutical companies. It appears he was using his patients to test unapproved treatments, falsifying the results to help get dangerous drugs fast-tracked for approval. I felt the room spin slightly. Even now, the depth of his depravity could still shock me. How many drugs? How many companies? At least 3 major pharmaceuticals. The FDA is already launching an investigation. This goes beyond individual murder. He was potentially endangering thousands of future patients with falsified drug trials. Back in the board meeting, decisions were being made rapidly. The hospital's entire research protocol would be restructured. External auditors would review all ongoing trials. Every death in the past 5 years would be independently investigated. What about the families? I asked, when they finally turned to the question of responsibility. The hospital's insurance can't begin to cover the damage done. We're establishing a victims' compensation fund, the chairman announced. Every penny Marcus earned through his crimes, every asset he acquired will be liquidated and distributed to the families. It won't bring back their loved ones, but it's a start. My phone lit up with another text, this one from Claire Morrison. She'd organized a support group for the victims' families, and they were gathering again in the hospital chapel. Some had been strangers before this morning, united, only by their shared loss. Now they were becoming a force for change, determined to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. As the meeting concluded, I walked to my own office, one floor down from Marcus's, where I'd worked while he carried out his murders, above me. The room felt different now, heavy with the weight of what I'd uncovered. On my desk, patient files still waited for review, people who trusted me with their lives just as others had trusted Marcus. A knock at my door revealed Dr. Reynolds from the Ethics Committee. The medical board just finished their emergency session, she reported. They're revoking Marcus's license immediately. Every doctor who participated in or knew about his schemes will face similar action. And the others? I asked. The ones who suspected but stayed quiet? Mandatory ethics reviews, supervised practice, possible suspensions depending on what they knew and when. No one's getting away clean from this. I nodded, turning to look out my window at the hospital grounds below. Somewhere out there, more families were just learning that their loved ones' deaths might not have been inevitable, that their trust had been betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. As evening approached, I found myself back in Marcus's private office watching the FBI team continue their methodical investigation. Every drawer, every file, every scrap of paper could contain evidence of another victim, another life cut short for profit. The weight of all those lost lives seemed to press down on the room like a physical presence. Mrs. Thorne, Agent Cooper, appeared in the doorway. Marcus is asking to speak with you. Says he wants to explain everything. I considered the request. Part of me wanted to refuse, to deny him even this small measure of control. But there were still questions that needed answers, details only he could provide. He's in interrogation, room 2 at the Federal Building, Cooper continued. We'll be monitoring everything, of course. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, I replied, gathering my coat. For the families. They deserve every answer we can get. The drive to the Federal Building was silent, the city's lights blurring past like stars. I thought about how different this day had been from what Marcus had planned. His grand gesture at Le Papillon, meant to humiliate me, had instead become the catalyst for his downfall. Marcus looked smaller somehow in his orange jumpsuit, his usual confident demeanor stripped away along with his expensive clothes and privileged position. When I entered the interrogation room, he barely lifted his head. You've been busy, he said finally, his voice hoarse. How long have you known? About your murders? Or about Olivia? I sat across from him, noting how he flinched at the word. Murders. I started suspecting something was wrong after Janet Morrison's death. The timing was too convenient, the insurance payout too neat, but I had no idea how deep it went until I started digging. They weren't murders, he protested weakly. They were terminal patients. I was trying to advance medical science, find new treatments. Save it for your lawyers, Marcus, I cut him off. I've seen your laptop, the spreadsheets, the death projections. You calculated everything down to the expected insurance payouts. This wasn't about medicine. It was about money. He seemed to deflate further, his carefully constructed justifications crumbling. The experimental wing needed funding. The traditional grants weren't enough. I thought, if I could just prove the treatments worked, by killing people who, we're getting better? By falsifying drug trials? I leaned forward. What about me, Marcus? Was I just another projection in your spreadsheet? Another convenient death to fund your research? Color drained from his face. You found that? The life insurance policy? The planned complications after my fictional pregnancy? Yes, I found it all. I pulled out my phone, showing him the evidence. You were going to kill me just like the others. Make it look like a tragic medical error. All while starting a new life with Olivia and your real baby. Rebecca, please. He reached across the table, but I pulled back. It wasn't like that. I loved you. Don't. My voice was ice. Don't you dare pretend this was about love. This was about control, about playing God. How many people did you kill, Marcus? What's the real number? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't keep count. Liar. I slapped the spreadsheet printouts on the table. You counted everything. Every death, every dollar, every detail perfectly documented. 47 confirmed victims, so far, and we're still finding more. Plus the ones from your previous hospitals, the falsified drug trials. How many lives did you really destroy? I can make a deal, he said suddenly, desperately. I know things about other doctors, other hospitals. People who helped me looked the other way. Already taken care of, I informed him. Dr. Patterson is cooperating fully. So is everyone else involved. Your entire network is unraveling as we speak. Even the pharmaceutical companies are under investigation. His last hope of leverage vanished. Marcus slumped in his chair, the full weight of his situation finally hitting him. The baby, he said quietly. Olivia's baby. We'll never know you, I finished for him. Olivia's in witness protection. She'll testify against you, then disappear to start a new life. Your child will never have to carry the burden of your name or your crimes. You've thought of everything, haven't you? A hint of his old bitterness crept into his voice. The perfect revenge. This isn't about revenge, Marcus. It's about justice. For Janet Morrison, for Thomas Chen, for Jennifer Adams, for every life you cut short, every family you destroyed. I stood up, gathering my things. The DA is seeking multiple life sentences. You'll never practice medicine again. Never hurt another patient. Never. See your child grow up. Wait, he called as I reached the door. Was any of it real? Our marriage? I paused, hand on the doorknob. I loved you once, before I knew what you really were, before you became a murderer. Without looking back, I added, Goodbye, Marcus. Enjoy your life sentence. You've earned it. Outside the interrogation room, Agent Cooper was waiting with Dr. Reynolds. We got it all on tape, he confirmed. His reactions, his admissions, it'll help strengthen the case even further. The medical board wants to issue a formal statement, Dr. Reynolds added. They're asking if you'll speak at the press conference tomorrow. The families have specifically requested you as their representative. My phone buzzed with another text from Claire Morrison. The support group had grown, now including families from Marcus's previous hospitals. They were organizing, planning to lobby for stricter oversight of experimental treatments, better protection for patients. One more stop, I told Cooper. I need to see Olivia before she's moved to witness protection. The safe house was in a quiet suburb, unmarked and unremarkable. Olivia sat in the living room, her hands protectively cradling her pregnant belly. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red from crying. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never knew, never suspected. I believe you, I said, sitting across from her. You were just another victim of his manipulation, but now you have a chance to make it right. Your testimony will help ensure he never hurts anyone else. The baby, she said, voicing her biggest fear. What will I tell them when they're older? How do you explain that their father is a serial killer? You tell them the truth, that you were strong enough to help stop him, that you chose justice over silence, that you protected them by making sure their father could never harm anyone else. 1 year later, the courtroom was packed for Marcus's sentencing. Families of his victims filled the gallery, each holding photographs of their loved ones. I sat in the front row beside Claire Morrison, watching as the man I'd once loved faced justice for his crimes. The trial had been exhaustive, lasting months as every death was examined, every piece of evidence scrutinized. Marcus's defense had crumbled in the face of overwhelming proof. The laptop's contents, Dr. Patterson's testimony, the pharmaceutical company's records, and most devastatingly, Olivia's statement about his admissions of guilt. "Will the defendant?" "Please rise," the judge instructed. Marcus stood slowly, a shell of his former self. Prison had aged him decades in just 1 year. "Dr. Marcus Thorne, you have been found guilty of 47 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of insurance fraud, medical malpractice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The depth of your crimes against your patients, their families, and the medical profession itself is unprecedented." I watched Marcus's shoulders slump as the judge continued. "You took advantage of your position of trust to prey upon vulnerable patients for financial gain. You killed people who were recovering, who had hopes and dreams and families. You betrayed every oath you took as a physician." The judge paused, looking directly at Marcus. "This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively for each count of murder. You will never practice medicine again. You will never profit from your crimes. You will spend the rest of your life reflecting on the lives you destroyed." As Marcus was led away, I felt Claire squeeze my hand. Her mother's case had been among the first I'd discovered, the one that had started my investigation. Now, finally, she had justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered for statements. The victims' families had asked me to speak for them, to give voice to their collective grief and triumph. "Today marks the end of a dark chapter in medical history," I began, looking into the cameras. "But it also marks a beginning. The Marcus Thorne Patient Protection Act, drafted by our survivors group and supported by medical boards nationwide, will ensure stricter oversight of experimental treatments. No family should ever again have to wonder if their loved one's death was part of a profit scheme." The law had been Claire's idea, born from those first meetings in the hospital chapel. It would require multiple independent reviews of experimental treatments, mandate transparency in insurance policies, and establish a national database to track unusual death patterns in medical trials. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. She'd relocated across the country with her baby daughter, starting fresh under a new identity. The photo showed a healthy, smiling infant, innocent of her father's crimes. "She'll never know him," Olivia had written. "Only the truth about how we helped stop him." Later that evening, I returned to the hospital for the first time in months. The experimental wing had been renovated and reopened, now named the Morrison Chen Memorial Research Center in honor of Marcus's first known victims. Under new leadership and strict oversight, it would focus on genuine medical research, working to save lives rather than end them. Dr. Sarah Martinez had taken over as head of oncology, her reputation restored after the truth about her earlier. Warnings came to light. The hospital's entire culture had changed. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, anonymous reporting systems implemented, and regular external audits became mandatory. In my office, I found a letter from the medical board. They were asking me to chair a new ethics oversight committee, using my experience to help prevent future abuse. The position would allow me to work directly with hospitals nationwide, implementing the protections and reforms born from this tragedy. "Dr. Thorne?" A nurse appeared in my doorway, one of the many who had provided evidence against Marcus once the investigation began. "The survivors group is gathering in the chapel. They'd like you to join them." I found them in their usual places, these people who had become like family over the past year. Claire Morrison, now running a patient advocacy organization. Sarah Chen, who had established a scholarship fund for medical ethics studies in her husband's name? Jennifer Adams's children, growing stronger every day. "We did it," Claire said simply, hugging me. "Mom would be proud. All of them would be." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. I looked around at these survivors, these warriors for justice who had turned their grief into action. Now we make sure their deaths weren't in vain. We keep fighting for change, for accountability, for protection of vulnerable patients. We tell their stories so no one forgets what happened here. My phone lit up with one final news alert. Medical serial killer begins life sentence. Below was a photo of Marcus being led to prison, his medical license permanently revoked, his crimes documented for history. The man who had planned to humiliate me with his pregnant mistress at our anniversary dinner had instead engineered his own destruction. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that shocking moment at Le Papillon to today's sentencing, every step had been about more than just revenge. It had been about justice, about systemic change, about turning personal tragedy into positive action. Marcus had thought bringing Olivia to our anniversary dinner would be his moment of triumph. Instead, it had become the catalyst for his downfall, exposing not just his infidelity, but his years of calculated murders. His attempt to destroy me had led to his own destruction, his crimes exposed, his victims finally given justice. The city. Lights blurred past my windows as I thought about all we had accomplished. 47 families had closure. Countless future patients would be protected by new laws and oversight. A killer had been stopped, a corrupt system exposed and reformed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, implementing the Protection Act, working with other hospitals to prevent similar crimes, supporting the ongoing survivors network. But tonight, I could rest knowing that justice had been served, that the truth had finally come to light. Marcus had brought his pregnant mistress to our anniversary dinner, thinking it would be his moment of victory. Instead, it had become the beginning of his end, the first step toward justice for all his victims. Sometimes I realized the best revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about exposing the truth and ensuring they can never harm anyone else again. 5 years later, the Morrison Chen Memorial Research Center gleamed in the morning sun as I walked up its familiar steps. The building had been completely transformed from the dark days of Marcus's crimes, now a beacon of hope and ethical medical research. Today marked a special milestone, the graduation of our first class of medical ethics fellows, trained specifically in preventing and identifying healthcare fraud. Dr. Thorne, a familiar voice called out. I turned to see Olivia, now going by Sarah Williams, approaching with her daughter Emma. At 5 years old, Emma was a bright, curious child who had never known her father's darkness. They had flown in secretly for this ceremony, their new identities still protected but secure enough now for occasional visits. The changes you've made here, Olivia said, looking up at the building. It's incredible. Emma, this is where Mommy helped make hospitals safer for everyone. Emma smiled shyly, clutching her mother's hand. She had Marcus's eyes, but Olivia's gentle spirit. Thanks to the Witness Protection Program and Olivia's courage in testifying, Emma would grow up free from her father's shadow, knowing only that her mother had helped stop bad people from hurting others. Inside my office, now decorated with awards and recognition for our patient protection initiatives, I found Claire Morrison waiting. She had become the national face of our advocacy movement, turning her mother's tragic death into a catalyst for change across the medical industry. The latest numbers are in, she announced, spreading reports across my desk. Patient mortality rates in experimental treatments have dropped 68% nationwide since the Protection Act was implemented. We're saving lives, Rebecca. I picked up one of the reports, noting the familiar hospital names. Every institution where Marcus had worked had undergone complete overhauls of their oversight systems. His crimes had exposed weaknesses in the entire medical establishment, leading to reforms that reached far beyond Boston. Dr. Patterson is being released next week, Claire continued, watching my reaction. Unlike Marcus, his former accomplice, had served a shorter sentence in exchange for his complete cooperation. He's agreed to join our speaking circuit, sharing his story to help other medical professionals recognize and report fraud. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Another hospital had adopted our protection protocols. The changes we'd implemented were spreading, creating a network of safety measures that would make it nearly impossible for someone like Marcus to operate undetected again. "There's something else," Claire said, pulling out a letter. "The Medical Ethics Board wants to establish a permanent position, Chief Patient Advocate. They're asking you to take it. The role would expand our work nationally, implementing protection systems in hospitals across the country." It was the culmination of everything we'd fought for since that night at Le Papillon, when Marcus's arrogance had finally exposed his crimes. Later that afternoon, I visited the hospital chapel, where our journey had begun. The space had been renovated into a memorial, photographs of Marcus's victims lining the walls. Each face told a story, not just of loss, but of the changes their deaths had inspired. Sarah Chen's widow had established a scholarship foundation, funding medical students who specialized in ethics and patient advocacy. Jennifer Adams' children had grown up to become healthcare whistleblower attorneys, protecting others who spoke up against fraud. My phone lit up with a message from Agent Cooper, now heading the FBI's specialized medical crimes unit that had grown from Marcus's case. "Thought you'd want to know." Marcus tried to appeal again. Denied unanimously. He'll never see the outside of a prison. I thought about Marcus, aging alone in his cell, his medical legacy transformed from renowned oncologist to cautionary tale. The experimental treatments he'd used to kill had been re-examined, and ironically, some held genuine promise when conducted ethically. Lives were being saved by the very research he had corrupted for profit. Walking through the hospital corridors, I passed the wall of photographs, official portraits of every department head. My own image hung there now, alongside Sarah Martinez, who had returned to head oncology. The plaque beneath my photo read, "Dr. Rebecca Thorne, Chief of Medical Ethics and Patient Protection." Outside, the survivors group was gathering for their monthly meeting. What had started as a small support group in the chapel had grown into a national organization with chapters in every major city. They helped families navigate the complex aftermath of medical fraud, turning victims into advocates. Dr. Thorne, one of the new members, called out, "Would you share your story again? About how you exposed the truth?" I looked at these faces, some bearing fresh grief, others hardened by experience into determination. They needed to hear not just about Marcus's crimes, but about how his exposure had led to positive change. "It began at an anniversary dinner," I started, telling the story one more time. "A man's arrogance made him think he could flaunt his betrayal without consequences. But that dinner became something else. The moment that finally brought decades of hidden crimes into the light." As I spoke, I thought about how that night had changed everything. Marcus had planned it as a cruel power play, bringing his pregnant mistress to humiliate me. Instead, it had become the catalyst for exposing his murders, saving countless future lives, and transforming the entire medical system. Olivia and Emma slipped into the back of the room, listening quietly. Emma would grow up in a world with better protections, stronger oversight, and more accountability in medical care. Her father's crimes had inadvertently created a legacy of safety and reform that would far outlast his name. The real victory, I concluded, wasn't just in stopping one killer. It was in creating systems to prevent others from following his path. Every life saved by our new protections, every fraud prevented by our oversight measures, every whistleblower protected by our policies, these are the true measure of our success. Later that night, as I prepared to leave the hospital, I passed the former experimental wing where Marcus had once ended lives for profit. Now it housed some of the most rigorous and ethical medical research in the country, saving lives under strict oversight and transparent protocols. Marcus had brought his pregnant mistress to our anniversary dinner, thinking he was writing the end of our story. Instead, he had unknowingly written the beginning of something far more significant, a transformation in medical ethics that would protect patients for generations to come. Sometimes the greatest victories come from our darkest moments, and the best revenge isn't in destruction, but in using truth to build something better from the ashes of betrayal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.